In Chapter 8, we'll be looking at human development. So more specifically, we're going to look at human development throughout the lifespan, beginning with prenatal phases all the way to end-of-life phases. So first of all, what is developmental psychology? And that's the field of psychology, and we look into the physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional changes that occur throughout the lifespan. Now, the thing is as I've always said in our classes, that as psychologists, we look at everything from the perspective that's known as the bio-psycho-social perspectives. And those are the three right there. The bio will be the physical, the psycho will be the cognitive, and the social will be the socio-emotional components of this approach. Right there, there's the three definitions of those. I've already kind of given you a very quick introduction to those. Be sure and stop the video and read the definitions there and become familiar with those. Now, as far as research methods, as you're well aware of at this point, there are different ways researchers actually gather information about their topic of research. So there are three different research methods that are important in the study of developmental psychology. And the first one is called cross-sectional method. And that is just looking at a single point in time, looking at a group of different people of different ages all at the same time. And that's called cross-sectional. Longitudinal, that is one person or a sample of persons over a period of time to determine their changes that occur throughout their lifespans. And finally, cross-sequential research method. That refers to looking at groups of people across of different ages and following them across time. Now, looking first at human development and everything, we're very interested in chromosomes and genes and how those affect human development. So chromosomes, those are inherited structures, DNA structures. And DNA, that's the molecule that provides the instructions for the development and production of cells. And finally, what is a gene? And that is a segment of a DNA molecule. So basically, the important things to think about in this slide right here is, each cell in your body contains a full set of 23 chromosomes. And and those are chromosome pairs, by the way, so that ends up being 46 total chromosomes. And the 23, I put a note down here that the 23 chromosome pairs, they contain the full blueprint for you as a complete, unique person. Okay, so this explains basically explains how genes are found in chromosomes, and we inherit our chromosomes from our biological parents. And each sperm contains 23 chromosomes, and each egg contains another 3 chromosomes, which makes the 23 pairs. And what's important to definitely know and memorize, it's the 23rd chromosome pair that determines genetic sex, whether male or female. And that is the 23rd chromosome pair. A few terms you should be familiar with here are listed here. Stop the video, read this, take notes. And if you need to refer to your textbook in this chapter in order to gain a little more insight, please do. Okay, so here's just an example, of chromosomes and genes. And there are two terms right here, dominant genes And those govern the expression of inherited characteristics. So that's what's the important term, is the expression of characteristics. Whereas a recessive gene cannot overcome a dominant gene. So, for example, the two photos right here, the person on the left, the man on the left, will have, you notice he has a widow's peak right there in his hairline. And they say that is the result of at least one dominant widow's peak gene, but the man on the right, he has two recessive straight hairline genes. A couple more terms that are really important to understand are zygote, and that's a single cell formed by the union of a sperm cell and an egg. Okay. And multiples, that refers to that can be subdivided into what's called monozygotic twins, and that they develop from one egg inseminated at conception. Whereas dizygotic twins, that occurs when two eggs are inseminated by two different sperm. Now, the germinal period refers to basically conception to the end of the second week. And so during that time, it is being implanted in the uterine wall, and that's where rapid growth starts to occur. And now, the embryo period, that's from the third to the eighth week. And that's when cells start becoming, they start differentiating. They become different from one another and start resulting in the formation of a unique future human. And they mentioned that formation of like major organs and systems began, the heart begins to beat, and spinal cord and intestinal systems, they develop by that time, by the end of that period. Now, the fetal period, that's the second month to birth, and that is characterized by rapid weight gain, sleep-wake cycles. All the organ system and structures are fully developed by birth, and brain weight is 1/4 of adult size by birth. Now, an important term to understand here is what's called teratogens, and those are toxins. They can actually damage a zygote, embryo, or fetus, and those are environmental dangers, by the way. Okay, so they just mention a few different teratogens right here, like drugs, environmental factors, infections, maternal disease. Stop this slide if you feel you'd like to look at this a little more in depth. Okay, so we're going to start looking at the phase of development that's newborn growth and development. So at that phase, there's newborns are born with certain reflexes and have automatic responses to environmental stimuli. So take, for instance, you'll notice that newborns will put a lot of things in their mouth, and they'll respond to sudden things, or like people's talking to them or making physical gestures, and they will look and maybe smile or wave their arms or things like that. They'll also do things like grasping, things like that. So these are just newborn reflexes. So newborn senses here, just briefly, I'm going to go over a few of these. Feel free to stop the slide and look a little more in depth at each one of these. So what's important to know is they're able to discriminate their mother's voice very shortly after they're born. That's actually very important, and hearing their mother's voice is very important for neurophysiological development. Okay, they develop a strong sense of taste. Actually, the sense of taste is the most highly developed sense at that phase of development. So they notice down here, they say they have blurred vision for several months, and actually newborns are only able to see and make sense of visual, sensory, visual type of information within like maybe 6 to 9 inches away from their eyes. Okay, now as the brain is growing here, in infancy and child development here, they experience what's called synaptic pruning. And so what they say here is unused synaptic connections, that occur because definitely when newborns in an early childhood, they have an extreme increase in neuronal connections. It's just very rapid, and there's just a lot happening in their brains at that time. But there comes a point, though, when unused synaptic connections, those are actually eliminated. They kind of cut away or die away, hence the term pruning. And now that's not a negative thing. That actually makes room for more efficient synaptic type neurophysiological type processes in the future. Okay, this refers to language, okay, and learning language in the environment and everything. Okay, and here's how babies will actually start acquiring a sense of language and development of language. And they begin in these 3 phases right here. First, they learn to coo, and then eventually they babble, and then eventually they'll be able to ultimately start speaking telegraphically, which means actually using actual short words and then eventually connecting those into longer groups of words. Okay, so in regard to development, there are a couple of researchers or developmental theorists that are important. And one of these, his name is Piaget, and he proposed that cognitive development is, that there are different phases of that. And he says that cognition is different in younger children than they are in adults. And so he mentioned a few of these, and I will just briefly refer to these that are called the sensory motor, the pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. So what's important to know is sensory motor, that's basically referring to sensing objects and everything. And so I'm not going to go further into that, but feel free to pause or look into your textbooks for a little bit more insight into this. Now, I'm going to skip here and get into concrete operational. This is what's important, is concrete operational. That's when a young child begins to think logically. And that usually doesn't occur until maybe after 6 years old or right around 6 years old. And then formal operational, that's when we get into more kind of like adult type thinking, more logical and systematic type thinking. And then here are a few key terms that Piaget used quite often. Okay, so feel free to stop and look at these a little more in depth. And another theorist that's very important in developmental psychology is this person named Vygotsky. And Vygotsky was very important in proposing that all learning occurs in a social context. So as they say here, under the overview, social and cultural factors, they influence how we think, our cognition. And so just keep that in mind. That's the most important thing to know about Vygotsky, is social and cultural factors influence how we learn and think. Okay. I'm not going to wait on this, but if you feel free to stop here and pause and look this over on your own time. Okay, so in another thing that's important in developmental psychology is the discussion of what's referred to as attachment. And that's the degree to which children or infants feel emotional connection with their primary caregivers, which usually are their parents or grandparents or immediate family, that kind of thing, or even adoptive parents. So there are three types of attachment. There is known as secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and ambivalent attachment. Please look in your textbooks and in order to get a little more in-depth understanding of these key terms here. Okay, another theorist that's really important is Erikson. And he was very interested in the psychosocial stages. And he pretty much proposed that human development is marked by 8 psychological stages from infancy to old age. And this is still a pretty well known theory even to this day and is used quite often. And a couple of the things, the reason why I left this slide here for you to look at is because Erikson, he associated some stages that he associated with infancy and childhood are the trust versus mistrust stage. And that's basically when a newborn and a young child learns that people in the environment and can either be trusted or mistrusted. They actually learn this, and when a baby learns to trust or mistrust, sometimes that will stick with a person throughout their life. And they have the autonomy versus shame and doubt. And autonomy, that refers to the baby feeling that, or the young child feeling that they are capable, that they can actually take care of things on their own. And then they have a sense of self-concept that is a person that can take care of and manage issues on their own. And if not, they may feel a sense of doubt about themselves. And then initiative versus guilt. Initiative is the same thing that I referred to as before, but initiative refers to the ability to take on things on one's own and solve problems on one's own. And if not, they may feel a sense of guilt if they don't. Okay, and here are some key terms to about in relation to physical and cognitive development. Please look these up in your textbook and please understand these. Now, once we get into adolescence, that is usually any time from age 9 to even to after age 14. And the typical ages are between 12 and 13 years old. That's when adolescence usually occurs. So those are usually characterized by two things. In females, that is usually when menstruation begins. And in males, that's the time when other types of sexual type things can happen. So please look at that, and we're moving on here. So timing and effects of maturation. Okay, in adolescence. So girls who usually acquire early maturation, they may experience more negative type results, social anxiety, emotional problems, and unhealthy and delinquent behaviors, and lower self-confidence. Whereas early maturing boys, they may have a more positive experience, but they tend to be a little more aggressive, and don't play by the rules, and may experience more like emotional tantrums and that kind of thing. Okay. So this just refers to during adolescence. Piaget says that formal operation, you remember that was deductive reasoning and critical thinking, more logical type thinking. That's when that starts occurring. Now, it also refers to adolescent egocentrism, and that's when the phase when a person might be a little more focused on themselves and how others perceive them. And yeah. Okay, so moving on here. So in the adolescent brain, there's significant, growth in the limbic system. And the limbic system, is closely associated with lots of emotional type processing, which can lead to an increase in risk-taking behavior because, they're looking to do things that make them feel good, that kind of thing. But there's an increased myelination of axons in the prefrontal cortex, also at this time. Now, socio-emotional development in adolescence, they mention a few of these here. Look these up on your own, please. And this just discusses the role of parents and adolescents and how they relate to each other. And last but not least, social media and psychology, and psychologists are interested in this. What is social media and social networking? What effect does that have on the teen brain? And so these are some questions you might consider, and maybe consider either your own experience or those maybe of teenagers at this time. Okay, and a little more Kohlberg also had stages of moral development, and more this had to do with a moralistic sense behavioral sense. And you can take a look at these three down here on your own: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional, and look these up in your textbook. Okay, we're starting to get into emerging adulthood, and that's usually 18 to 25 years old. That's when a more sense of autonomy occurs. All right, early adulthood and middle adulthood. They talk about a couple different characteristics here. Please take a moment and look at these. And late adulthood is characterized by kind of a decline in physical and psychological functions. Maybe vision deteriorates, losing vision, cataracts, that kind of thing. Maybe hearing decline, that kind of thing. But they say an important thing as one ages, is to try to keep exercising, and that actually keeps neuronal development. It actually facilitates neuronal development. Okay, and looking here, early adulthood. Okay, middle and late adulthood here. Here are a couple of characteristics. And so here's just some suggestions, as one ages, how to stay sharp, and not let aging, kind of get the best of you. They say, definitely having strong social networks, being part of a group, clubs, that kind of thing. That really helps with cognitive and psycho-emotional type integrity. Okay, and we're going to look at early and middle and late adulthood, and basically here are the three right here. And just discuss parenting briefly. There are four types of parenting that they discuss, and one is authoritarian, and that is when the parent basically has an attitude with the child that what I say goes, you do everything the exact way I tell you, and you don't do anything without asking me first. That's authoritarian type parenting. But authoritative parenting, on the other hand, that's more as the parent maintains an image or a figure of having a sense of authority, but still discusses with the child issues and allows the child to, and actually mentors the child in helping to make good decisions and that kind of thing. Now, permissive parenting, on the other hand, that refers to a type of parenting where you basically just let the child get away with most things, let them do what they want. And uninvolved parenting, I don't think we needed to elaborate on that much more than just saying that is a parent who just is completely uninvolved. It just wants no part of it. Now we're going to get into end of life type phases of development and death and dying, and saying, look, this Kubler-Ross, they theorize that one might, in this phase of development, go through various stages, and they mention denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And once we get into discussing death, views of death are related to religion, culture. So various cultures and people that practice various religions, they may view death as in different ways. Some people will become very sad when a family member dies, and they will mourn them for months or even years. Whereas maybe in other cultures, they will actually celebrate the family member moving on to the next phase of spirituality, spiritual development or something, and they'll actually have a big celebration. So those are just two examples of how different cultures or religious type practices might view death. And that concludes our discussion. So from this point, I highly recommend you review this video and stop and view your textbook in relation with this, and to get further details on things. And last but not least, begin to answer the questions in the accompanying study guide for this chapter.